Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we trade the familiar comfort of Earth's documented past for the unsettling, cold silence of what lies beyond. You're not flipping through a textbook tonight. You're standing on the edge of a deep, sun-baked trench in the middle of nowhere. The air is dry, tasting of ancient dust and a faint metallic tang you can't quite place. Above you, the desert sky is a bowl of unbroken azure, vast and indifferent. Below, the heat shimmers, distorting the view of your colleagues scrambling like ants around a discovery that is about to rewrite every line in human history. You feel the grit of the high desert beneath the heavy soles of your boots, the endless expanse of sand and rock stretching out to meet a jagged purple horizon. It's beautiful, in a brutal, uncompromising way, but that beauty is a thin veneer, barely concealing the profound, reality-warping secret just unearthed. You probably won't survive this level of cognitive dissonance, not without questioning everything you've ever learned. You shift your weight, the cheap nylon strap of your binoculars biting into your neck. The wind here doesn't whisper, it rasps, dragging the fine red dust across the exposed bedrock, a sound that feels less like nature and more like a slow, deliberate erasure of time. Remember the comfort of knowing where you stood in the historical timeline. The neat boxes of the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Industrial Revolution. Throw that timeline out. It's dissolving, turning to vapour in the intense desert heat. Look down into the excavation pit, almost 30 feet deep now. The sedimentary layers tell a story you thought you knew, layer upon layer of millennia. Each stratum a chapter of slow, predictable geological and biological change. And then, there it is, cutting horizontally across strata that should only contain the fossils of early megafauna and nothing else. A clean, impossible line. Your mind races, trying to categorize the site, to make it fit. Is it a forgotten piece of Cold War testing equipment? A remarkably preserved meteorite? You try to ground yourself by recalling mainstream historical facts about ancient civilizations and their resourcefulness. For instance, you remember that the ancient Egyptians, way back around 3000 BCE, were masters of stonemasonry, moving colossal blocks of limestone and granite with remarkable precision, a testament to early engineering ingenuity. They achieved incredible feats, but they didn't leave behind geometrically perfect, non-corroding metal. You also recall a quirky tidbit. There's a fringe theory suggesting that some Olmec colossal heads in Mexico, sculpted perhaps as early as 1500 BCE, display distinct facial features that might indicate pre-Columbian transoceanic contact, which is the historical equivalent of a quiet, persistent cough in the back of the lecture hall. Always there, usually ignored, but occasionally worth a double take. This find, however, isn't a cough. It's a seismic shift. The initial report that dragged you out here was almost comically dry. Anomaly detected. Subsurface. Non-geological signature. Requires on-site verification. That's the kind of language used for a pipe leak, not for something that looks like the hull of a broken vessel embedded in rock dated to the Pleistocene era. You can see the lead archaeologist, Dr. Elias Thorne, a man whose permanent expression is usually one of mild academic disdain, wiping sweat from his brow. Even from this distance, you can sense the fear mixed with a terrifying ecstasy radiating off him. He's holding a clipboard, but he's not looking at it. He's just staring, transfixed, like a religious supplicant before an unimaginable icon. Thorne waves you down with a shaky hand. You take the narrow, dusty ramp into the pit, the air getting noticeably heavier, the strange metallic scent stronger. You joke to yourself that maybe this is just a hyper-advanced, self-cleaning, indestructible ancient Roman bathhouse, because honestly, that's less unsettling than the alternative. You know the scholarly debate phrase that's about to dominate every university corridor. Historians still argue whether technological innovation is a linear process, or if key advances are cyclical and often lost to history. But what you are looking at bypasses that debate entirely. This isn't lost technology, it's impossible technology, at least for this epoch. You reach the bottom, and the object is right there, partially exposed. It's enormous, perhaps 30 feet long and maybe 12 wide, though much of it remains entombed in the hard, unforgiving caliche layer. Its surface is a uniform, dark silver, catching the harsh desert light without reflecting it brightly. It's too smooth. There are no rivets, no seams, no tool marks. It looks less like something manufactured and more like a single, colossal pour of liquid metal cooled instantly. You run the back of your gloved hand over it, and despite being buried for an unimaginable length of time, it is cool to the touch, almost unnaturally so, resisting the 110-degree ambient temperature of the pit. Thorn points to a section where the dig team has managed to clear away the last stubborn chunks of rock, revealing a small, intricate pattern on the surface. "Look closer," he whispers, his voice cracked with dehydration and awe. You lean in, your shadow falling across the metallic skin. The pattern isn't etched, it looks woven, like a microscopic three-dimensional tapestry. It's a repeating geometric motif that makes your eyes feel slightly crossed, defying the simple laws of perspective your brain is trained to interpret. You briefly wonder if the whole thing is just a colossal, millennia-old piece of performance art, which would be hilarious, but the sheer scale and density rule out that delightful possibility. As a quick mental break from the cosmic dread, you briefly recall that historians have a genuine, non-alien debate about the Antikythera mechanism, the ancient Greek analogue computer, a sophisticated device from the 1st century BCE that suggests Hellenistic technology was far more advanced than previously imagined. Could this be merely a grander, older version of that kind of outlier? A massive leap, perhaps, by a brief forgotten civilization? Number. The surrounding geology absolutely rejects that conclusion. The stone matrix around the object is solid, undisturbed for millions of years. This didn't sink in, it was encased. You take a deep breath, trying to steady the sudden, wild drumming of your heart. The desert, which felt empty and impersonal moments ago, now feels alive, watchful. You're not just an archaeologist anymore. You're an eyewitness to an event that transcends human history. This isn't an artifact. It's a disruption. You realise that the whispers of the sand were not the wind at all, but the muffled screams of the past, silenced by a truth too massive to comprehend. Your role now is simple. Document the impossible, try not to go mad, and keep breathing the thin, dusty air. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your location and the local time in the comments. It's always fun to see who's awake with me for these little existential crises. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The only thing standing between you and the unthinkable is a few feet of millennia-old sandstone. The metallic object, half exposed in the ancient red earth, doesn't just sit there, it imposes itself. You watch as Dr. Thorn, fighting a visible tremor in his hands, gestures to the dig team to begin the delicate process of isolating a smaller protruding section. This isn't brute force archaeology, it's a surgical operation on the deep past. You step closer, the temperature discrepancy between the air and the artifact's surface, that unnerving, persistent coolness, giving you a slight chill even under the baking sun. It feels like touching a block of ice through a thick blanket. You half expect to see condensation forming, but the air is far too dry for that. The excavation shifts from shovels and brushes to ultrasonic chisels, used sparingly, to micro-vibration tools designed to flake away the adhering layers of caliche without scratching the surface. The crew members, all highly trained professionals, move with the kind of nervous reverence usually reserved for handling unexploded ordnance. And perhaps they should. What they are touching could explode all existing paradigms of human history. You lean over the edge of the pit, watching one technician gently free a piece that looks almost like a detachable panel or a large shard. It's about the size of a car door, and as the surrounding rock is finally cleared, the team prepares for the heave. But they don't have to heave. As the last few threads of millennia-old sediment are loosened, the piece floats. Not rises, but simply detaches itself with a slow, almost lazy glide, and then settles softly onto the floor of the pit. Everyone freezes. The absolute silence in the excavation pit is deafening, broken only by the relentless rasp of the desert wind far above. You think, that's new? Rocks don't do that. This piece, this first unnatural casing, is what your attention locks onto. It's not heavy. In fact, two technicians pick it up with a startling ease, carrying it out of the trench like a large sheet of plywood. You follow them to the staging area, a makeshift laboratory tent buzzing with generators and the hum of monitoring equipment. Under the harsher, focused beam of the halogen lamps, the object's details become sharper, more defiant. You reach out, pausing your hand just inches above the surface. It is smooth in a way that suggests molecular uniformity, not merely polishing. It's utterly featureless, except for a depth of colour, a deep dark silver that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. When you finally allow your glove to make contact, the texture is alien. It feels like highly polished marble, yet you know it is metal. And the weight, it's preposterously light. Based on its dimensions, you'd expect several £100. It barely registers 50. This immediately raises a red flag in your mind, not about the object's authenticity, but about its provenance. Thinking of mainstream historical facts, you recall that the development of lightweight, high-tensile alloys has been a cornerstone of our own technological advancement, particularly in aerospace, starting in earnest in the early 20th century with materials like duralumin. Our breakthroughs rely on complex smelting and cooling processes perfected over decades. This casing predates human history. Its composition, which the field analyst is now scrambling to identify using a portable mass spectrometer, seems to be a single, homogeneous element, or at least an alloy so perfectly bonded it presents as one. The analyst, a young woman named Lena whose usual composure is entirely gone, finally gets a tentative reading. She shakes her head, muttering, iron, magnesium, silicon, but the ratios are impossible, and there are trace isotopes that shouldn't exist, the key word being trace. The bulk of the material, she reports, is an entirely unknown element, or at least an element with an isotopic signature utterly foreign to the solar system's known elemental ratios. It's the metallurgical equivalent of finding a human being with 4 lungs and purple blood. Familiar in part, but fundamentally wrong in composition. You step back, rubbing your tired eyes. You try to inject some levity into the terrifying situation by remembering the quirky tidbit about the ancient Roman concrete, a material so durable that many structures like the Pantheon have outlasted their modern counterparts, partly due to the inclusion of volcanic ash. Scholars still can't exactly replicate its enduring self-healing properties. This artifact, however, goes far beyond a lost recipe for cement. It's a physics problem. It's ultra-light, yet seems incredibly dense and resistant to scratching. Lena couldn't even manage a microscopic abrasion with a diamond tip. This begs the central question, the one you know will be debated for centuries. The scholarly debate phrase that will echo through the halls of academia will be, historians still argue whether material science advancements are dictated solely by the available raw materials on a planet, or if the limiting factor is merely the conceptual capacity of a species. The casing is a terrifying answer to that. It suggests that if a species can conceive of a stronger-than-diamond, lighter-than-aluminum alloy, they can create it, perhaps manipulating physics itself to stabilize unstable, non-terrestrial isotopes. You start to examine the edges of the panel, trying to understand how it was joined to the main body. There is no evidence of welding, no soldering, no rivets, no screws. It appears to have been separated by design, a clean, almost molecular fracture that implies the main structure must be equally seamless. You recall a light joke, thinking that maybe the manufacturers just used the world's most powerful millennia-old superglue, but you quickly dismiss the thought. This wasn't attached. It was grown or fabricated as part of a whole, and then somehow, gently, detached. Your eyes catch a flicker of movement within the smooth surface. You blink, convinced it's the heat or exhaustion, but it happens again. Under the bright lamps, tiny hairline etchings on the surface of the casing, invisible at the dig site, are now faintly shimmering. They're not scratches. They're incredibly fine, almost microscopic grooves that seem to form non-repeating, chaotic patterns. Lena brings over a high-powered digital microscope. You peer into the eyepiece. What you see is mesmerizing and utterly disturbing. The grooves are not random. They are mathematical. It's not writing, not yet. It's an arrangement of lines and nodes that, even to your untrained eye, look like some form of highly complex multi-dimensional diagram. It's not like the familiar two-dimensional diagrams of earthly engineering. These patterns seem to be representing a concept that requires 4, 5, or maybe even more spatial dimensions to fully grasp. You feel a familiar, prickly sensation on the back of your neck. The realization that you are looking at technology that makes our own computer microprocessors look like children's abacuses. The lightweight, the impossible strength, the alien isotopic signature, and now the shimmering complex etchings. All of it screams a single, terrifying word. Non-terrestrial. You can almost hear the gears grinding to a halt in the scientific community before this news is even public. They'll demand verification, double-blind studies, and peer review, all of which will crumble under the weight of this single, feather-like casing. You imagine the headlines: "Archaeologists discover a piece of something that does not belong here." You spend another hour in the tent documenting the casing's properties. It doesn't oxidize. It doesn't conduct terrestrial electricity, at least not conventionally. When Lena tries to subject it to a focused laser beam, the beam simply refracts, creating a rainbow that lasts for a second before the energy dissipates without leaving a trace of heat or damage. It's a material that laughs at our most fundamental attempts to measure or harm it. You realise that you're not studying an artifact. You're studying a wall, a sheer limit of human understanding. The desert heat outside the tent feels oppressive, but the deep, cold mystery contained within this metallic casing is infinitely more suffocating. You are now holding incontrovertible proof that we are not alone in the vastness of time and space, and that realization carries the true, heavy weight of the moment. The smooth, dark silver casing now rests on a reinforced examination table, a beacon of impossible physics surrounded by blinking terrestrial gadgets that suddenly look primitive. The initial shock over the weight and material composition has given way to a deeper, more chilling realization. The object's internal logic, its very form, is fundamentally alien. You lean close, peering through the lens of a portable holographic scanner, which is attempting to map the casing's surface topography. The resulting image on the screen is not a simple 3D model. It's a flickering, unstable nightmare of lines and nodes. Dr. Thorne, wiping his spectacles with a cloth that seems inadequate for the task, murmurs, "It's like looking at a shadow of a shape we can't perceive directly. Our instruments keep trying to force it into Euclidean space, and it keeps refusing." You notice the geometry etched into the surface, the faint shimmering patterns you observed earlier, are not purely decorative. They appear to be integral to the structure. When the holographic scanner maps one section, it detects a series of lines that seem to converge at a point outside of the physical plane of the object. They create angles that sum up to more than 180 degrees within a closed shape, a mathematical impossibility in the 3 dimensions we inhabit. This is the geometry that defied earthly math. Think about the triangle you learned about in school, where the angles always add up to 180 degrees. That's Euclidean geometry, the bedrock of all our physical sciences, from architecture to orbital mechanics. This artifact, however, displays properties of non-Euclidean geometry, the kind that describes warped space-time near a black hole or the surface of a sphere. But it's doing it here, in miniature, on a flat-looking plate of metal. The lines appear straight, yet they behave as if they are tracing the contours of a 5th-dimensional sphere. It's a physical manifestation of concepts that exist for us only in the most abstract corners of theoretical physics. To put this into perspective, you recall a mainstream historical fact. The ancient Greek mathematician Euclid, around 300 BCE, codified the geometric principles that governed human understanding of space for over 2 millennia, creating a framework so reliable it became synonymous with absolute truth. His Elements is one of the most influential works in Western history. Finding this artifact is like Euclid himself stepping out of a time machine and being handed a textbook from the 23rd century, written in a language that manipulates the very axioms he established. The isotopic analysis Lena conducted earlier now makes terrifying sense. The unique non-terrestrial elements, the impossible ratios, are not just random impurities. They are the building blocks required to stabilize this non-Euclidean structure. On Earth, these isotopes might be unstable, decaying rapidly. Here, within the matrix of the alien metal, they are locked into an incredibly rigid, ordered state, maintaining the geometric integrity of the impossible shapes. The material and the math are one and the same. You feel a giddy, almost hysterical urge to laugh. It's the kind of laugh that comes from realizing the entire universe is a prank and you're the punchline. You quickly check yourself, reminding yourself of the dignity of scientific inquiry, even when the subject is completely insane. You briefly consider the quirky tidbit that some historians and fringe theorists propose that the intricate, mathematically perfect designs found on crop circles are the only verifiable evidence of alien contact, precisely because they encode complex prime number-based patterns. If that's the bar for proof, this casing is a whole library of cosmic data. One of the junior physicists, a quiet man who usually only talks about his fondness for obscure German board games, points to the scanner display. Look at the stress points, he whispers. There aren't any. A structure this size, even made of an alloy as strong as this, should have internal stress lines from being buried under tons of sediment for millions of years, not to mention the forces involved in whatever impact put it here. But the field remains perfectly uniform. This uniformity is the key. The non-Euclidean geometry, the warping of space inherent in the design, must be acting as a structural integrity field. It's not just a fancy shape. It's an active principle of design where the geometry itself is responsible for its indestructibility. The shape prevents stress. It's a closed loop of form and function that laughs at the second law of thermodynamics. You realise that any attempt to cut this casing, to force it into a shape it doesn't want to be, would be futile. You can't drill a hole in a concept. You step back, allowing the team to continue their mapping attempts, which are slowly generating a massive unusable data file full of spatial anomalies. Your brain is trying to find a terrestrial equivalent, a point of comparison to ground this reality. Maybe the molecular structure of a diamond. But that's a simple, repeating lattice. This is a structure that seems to be repeating a pattern of non-repetition, a logic that changes every time you look at it. This leads directly into the philosophical core of the discovery, the central scholarly debate phrase that will ignite furious symposia. Historians still argue whether the fundamental limits of a species' technological progress are primarily constrained by its grasp of mathematics or its available energy sources. This artifact suggests a civilization that transcended both constraints simultaneously. They didn't just solve a geometry problem, they weaponized it. You look down at your reflection in the casing's surface, which is a distorted, unnervingly calm visage. You briefly consider a light joke, that perhaps this is just the world's most complicated millennia-old funhouse mirror, designed by an alien prankster, but the metallic scent and the deep, cold stillness of the object quickly sober you up. The field analysts eventually manage to isolate a minuscule point on the casing, where a tiny magnetic fluctuation seems to emanate. It's not a pole or a field, just a persistent, weak fuzz of energy. The physicist runs the calculations, trying to derive a fundamental unit of measurement from the structure's internal mathematical logic. He keeps getting numbers that relate to constants of the universe, like the speed of light or Planck's constant, but twisted slightly off-kilter, as if calculated in a different but parallel universe. The scale is wrong, he finally declares defeated. Everything about it is scaled incorrectly for our universe's constants. It's like their inch is our mile, but mathematically consistent with their physics. The entire object is constructed using a baseline of physics we simply don't recognize. You touch the casing one last time, feeling that same unnerving coolness. It's not just a piece of metal, it's a mathematical argument, a silent 3 million-year-old proof that our understanding of reality is woefully incomplete. You realize that the casing's refusal to be measured, its non-Euclidean nature, is less about advanced engineering and more about a disdainful disregard for our earthly limitations. The geometry wasn't designed to be difficult to understand. It was designed to be impossible for us to replicate, at least until we fundamentally change the way we look at space itself. This single, feather-light plate is the heaviest intellectual burden you've ever encountered. The immediate scientific findings, the non-terrestrial isotopic signatures, the physics-defying weight-to-density ratio, and the impossible, non-Euclidean geometry were initially contained within the security perimeter of the desert dig. But secrets, especially terrifying ones, are notoriously bad at staying buried. A disgruntled field technician, maybe someone who genuinely feared the truth should be out, managed to leak a blurry photo of the casing and a few lines of Lena's isotope report to a minor online forum. The effect was instantaneous and utterly chaotic. Within hours, the world was awash in the news, and the reaction settled quickly into a predictable two-pronged storm. Global skepticism from the established institutions, and a fervent, often breathless, validation from the fringes. You sit in the hastily erected communications tent, watching the live feed of news channels flicker across a dusty monitor. On screen, a highly respected astrophysicist from a major university is doing the academic equivalent of spitting nails. This is clearly an elaborate hoax, he pronars, adjusting his expensive tie. The so-called impossible geometry is easily explained by advanced terrestrial prototyping, perhaps a specialised carbon composite we haven't officially catalogued. The isotope data is likely corrupted by equipment malfunction, or, frankly, outright forgery. We see this every time someone finds a curiously shaped rock. This official skepticism is a defence mechanism. It's the immune system of established knowledge fighting off a lethal pathogen of truth. They must dismiss it, because accepting it means tearing up every single syllabus, every grant proposal, and every tenured argument they've ever made. The very foundations of geology, physics, and history would dissolve in a puff of ancient desert dust. You can't blame them, really. It's easier to call the impossible a lie than to accept the reality of an impossible visitor. Your team's commitment to rigorous documentation now becomes paramount, because the world is demanding proof that isn't just a grainy photo. You recall the mainstream historical fact that the discovery of the Piltdown Man hoax in 1953, where human and ape remains were cleverly combined to prove an evolutionary link, rocked the scientific community and led to decades of heightened suspicion regarding anomalous archaeological finds. The memory of that high-profile deception means your team must be whiter than white, cleaner than clean, or the casing will be relegated forever to the bin of crank theories and pseudoscience. Meanwhile, away from the sterile lights of the mainstream media, the local legends merge with the breaking news in a far more unsettling way. The remote plateau where you are digging is on the traditional lands of a small isolated indigenous group. For generations they have maintained a rich oral tradition, a quirky tidbit in anthropological terms, that speaks of the Star People. These weren't benevolent cloud-riding gods. They were described as visitors who came in the dark, cool vessels from the Eye of the Scorpion, which, chillingly, is a very specific constellation now identified by your team's astronomers. Elder members of the local community are now showing up near the perimeter, not with protest signs, but with an eerie sense of vindication. Their stories, which were always dismissed as charming mythology, now sound like eyewitness accounts. They speak of a great falling millennia ago, when one of the cool vessels crashed, and how their ancestors were instructed to avoid the site, to let the desert swallow the strange metal until the time of the turning of the worlds. They offer details about the object's shape, and even its strange, cool temperature, details that were never public. You realise the profound irony. The most sophisticated, high-tech instruments of modern science are confirming the oldest, most marginalised stories told around desert campfires. The local, indigenous perspective is no longer a quaint anthropological footnote. It's an invaluable historical record. You send a small, respectful team to engage with the elders, realising that they may hold the decryption key to this object, not your supercomputers. The scholarly debate phrase that is about to explode in the history departments is this: historians still argue whether oral traditions hold a verifiable degree of historical accuracy, or if they are primarily mutable cultural narratives adapted over time. This artifact is tilting the scales violently toward verification, suggesting that deep historical memory can survive far longer and in more accurate detail than previously thought possible, acting as a kind of cultural time capsule. On the darker side of the internet, the leakers fueled a tidal wave of conspiracy theories. Every outlandish idea you've ever dismissed, from ancient astronauts building the pyramids to hidden military bases, is now being retrofitted to explain the casing. You see live streams of people weeping hysterically, convinced this is the prelude to an invasion. You see others treating the discovery as a sign of imminent salvation, a technological gift from the heavens. The psychological impact on the global population is staggering, a fascinating, if terrifying, sociological experiment playing out in real time. You sit with Thorne, sipping a lukewarm coffee that tastes mostly of silt, and joke to him that maybe this is just a cleverly disguised millennia-old air conditioning unit, left behind by some particularly lazy intergalactic tourists. He doesn't laugh. He just stares at the screen where a commentator is screaming about the end of the world. The problem, Thorne says quietly, is that the real truth is more terrifying than the conspiracies. The conspiracies assume intention, an invasion, a gift. This thing suggests nothing but indifference. It suggests they crashed here millions of years ago and didn't care enough to come back and pick up the pieces. You look out at the object, now better protected by a canvas awning, glinting coolly under the sun. The silence it maintains is the loudest, most eloquent statement of cosmic apathy you can imagine. It's perfection, it's impossible science, highlights the gulf between their civilization and ours. The global skepticism is a coping mechanism, a way for humanity to avoid the fact that we are the less advanced species in this encounter. The cultural equivalent of finding a pocket change from a millionaire who barely registered your existence. The only way to cut through the noise, you realise, is not with more debate, but with more digging. You must move past the casing and unearth the rest of the object. The immediate task now is to trace the history of the impossible material itself, to pinpoint, with absolute certainty, when it was placed there. The geology holds the key to silencing the skeptics and authenticating the chilling stories of the local elders. You need to pin a precise, irrefutable date to the object, a date that will shatter the human historical narrative beyond repair. The chaotic noise of global skepticism and the eerie validation from the local legends has created a deafening backdrop to the real work, fixing the object within the timeline of the Earth. To silence the critics who claim advanced terrestrial prototyping or modern hoax, you need irrefutable proof of age. This involves meticulously tracing the material's prehistory, an undertaking that makes standard carbon dating look like simple arithmetic. You stand with Lena, the isotope specialist, next to the exposed main body of the artifact, the strange metal emanating its unnerving coolness. Traditional dating methods are useless here. You can't date the object itself because it's non-organic, and its non-terrestrial composition means its internal decay rates are entirely unknown. You must rely solely on the geology surrounding it, treating the artifact as a massive fossil that killed the very rock it's embedded in. The team begins the laborious process of thermoluminescence dating and paleomagnetic dating on the surrounding sediment layers. Thermoluminescence works by measuring the energy trapped in quartz and feldspar crystals in the rock, released as light when heated. The last time the sediment was exposed to sunlight was when it was deposited, and since then radioactive decay in the rock has built up a signal. This gives you the last time the dirt wasn't dirt, but sediment on the surface. The initial results are so far outside the accepted envelope for any human technological presence that they are immediately rerun twice, using different, independently calibrated labs. The numbers keep converging on the same staggering range, 2.5 to 3.2 million years ago, MYA. To provide a sense of scale, you recall a mainstream historical fact. The earliest definitive evidence of tool use by hominins, simple stone tools, or the older one tradition, dates to approximately 2.6 million years ago. This era, the Pliocene-Pleistocene boundary, saw the rise of Homo habilis, a creature just barely standing upright, with a brain slightly larger than a chimpanzee's. The concept of building a seamless, non-Euclidean metal structure during the time when our ancestors were still figuring out how to strike one rock against another is not just anomalous. It's a direct, violent contradiction of the entire human evolutionary narrative. The paleomagnetic dating, which measures the residual magnetism in the surrounding iron-rich clay to determine the position of the Earth's magnetic poles at the time of deposition, confirms this range. It places the sedimentary layer firmly within the Gauss epoch, a period known for a series of magnetic reversals. The artifact therefore crashed, or was placed here while our ancestors were still more ape than human, wandering the savannas of Africa, a continent away from this desert plateau. You lean back, the weight of the moment pressing down on you. This isn't an out-of-place artifact, UPART, that is a few hundred or a few thousand years too early, like the alleged Baghdad battery. This is an OOP art that is millions of years too early. It fundamentally proves that the technological history of this planet is not ours alone. The team also performs chemical analysis on the microscopic layers of rock directly adhering to the casing. They find a high concentration of shocked quartz, and a unique combination of iridium and osmium, elements common in cosmic impacts, but found here in a distribution that suggests an object survived the impact rather than vaporizing. This is a quiet joke of the universe. The very debris that killed the terrestrial rock matrix confirms the object is literally from the stars. Now, for a slightly less mainstream but contextually relevant quirky tidbit. The mysterious UPARTs of the geological record, such as the alleged Koso artifact, a spark plug-like object found in a geode supposedly 500,000 years old, have long been dismissed due to dating ambiguities or proven contamination. This current find, however, with its multi-method geological dating and verifiable non-terrestrial composition, elevates the discussion from conspiracy theory to terrifying documented reality. The casing has passed the too early to exist test with millions of years to spare. The scholarly debate phrase that will inevitably emerge from this dating is, historians still argue whether the concept of linear time, as applied to biological and technological evolution, is an accurate model, or if major jumps are the result of external non-indigenous intervention. The artifact makes a strong case for the latter, suggesting human evolution may have occurred under a cosmic shadow we never detected. You watch as Thorne carefully photographs a minute piece of fossilised material found just underneath the artifact, a sliver of what appears to be a prehistoric plant root, crushed flat. The root is dated to exactly the same period as the surrounding sediment, confirming that the object was in place before the vegetation of the time grew over it. The root is the final witness. It testifies to the fact that this metal has been resting in the desert for longer than the species Homo sapiens has existed. You briefly consider a light joke, that maybe this entire structure is just a very, very old, forgotten alien lunchbox dropped during a galactic road trip, and now we're the ones stuck with the enormous bill for its retrieval. But the deep, cold sense of isolation the object exudes quickly stops you. The sheer scale of the time involved is what truly shatters the nerves. 3 million years. Imagine the length of time human history encompasses, from the invention of writing to the space shuttle, maybe 10,000 years. This object has been here, silent, unmoving, for 300 times longer than that entire span of recorded human civilization. It has weathered ice ages, magnetic pole reversals, and countless millennia of geological erosion, all while remaining as pristine and cool to the touch as the day it arrived. Its material science is not merely advanced, it is perfect. The dating results are uploaded to the secure server, ready to be presented to the inevitable international panel of skeptical experts. You know they will try to find fault, a sampling error, a contamination, but the sheer volume and consistency of the data will make rejection almost impossible. The timeline is set. The object is not a relic of a lost human civilization. It is a leftover from a civilization that visited Earth before there was anyone here to even notice. The next step is inevitable, and it must be approached with the utmost caution. If the large casing represents the hull, there must be internal components. Something that wasn't just metal, but perhaps a power source, a navigation system, or a piece of advanced internal architecture. The search now shifts from the exterior to the interior, from the geological past to the technological core. You steel yourself, knowing that if the casing itself was a disruption, whatever is inside will be an upheaval. The desert heat seems to grow hotter, the weight of 3 million years settling onto your shoulders. Having established the artifact's terrifying age, over 3 million years, the focus shifts from the ancient timeline to the internal architecture. The metallic casing, which resisted all attempts at intrusion, finally yields a clue. As the excavators gently clear the dirt from a large, partially shattered section of the main body, they find a small, secondary object lying loosely within what appears to be a structural cavity. It's not attached, suggesting it was either ejected during the ancient impact or was simply resting there, held in place by friction and millennia of sediment. This is the silent cube, and its discovery sends a fresh wave of adrenaline through the weary, dusty team. You watch as it's carefully lifted, placed in a specialised non-magnetic containment field, and rush to the examination tent. Unlike the large flowing geometry of the casing, this object is perfectly, unsettlingly conventional in shape. A pristine cube, approximately 8 inches on each side. Its surface is the same dark, light-absorbing silver, but with a slight, almost imperceptible pulsation of light that seems to come from within the material itself, not from a reflection. When you approach it, you feel a distinct physical sensation, a low-frequency vibration that hums in your teeth, and a noticeable localized drop in temperature, far colder than the large casing. The cube feels colder than ice, yet it generates no observable frost or condensation. It is, quite simply, an object that is locally and perpetually defying the second law of thermodynamics, a self-contained pocket of impossible physics. The first attempts at analysis focus on determining the nature of its power. This is the ultimate prize, discovering the power source that allowed a technological object to maintain its integrity, and perhaps even a minimal level of function for 3 million years. Lena sets up a battery of sensors looking for conventional radiation, electrical fields, or even subtle fluctuations in the gravitational constant. The findings are, predictably, baffling. The cube is generating a constant low-level energy output that cannot be categorized as electrical, chemical, or nuclear in the terrestrial sense. It's a closed-loop system of negative entropy. It's consuming nothing, yet sustaining a field. The best analogy the exhausted physicist can come up with is that the cube is somehow drawing minute amounts of energy directly from the very fabric of space-time, a kind of localized, perpetual zero-point energy tap. You try a light joke, thinking that perhaps it's just running on a 3 million-year-old battery guarantee, but the cold reality of the object quickly stifles the humour. You recall a mainstream historical fact regarding human attempts at advanced energy production. Our development of controlled nuclear fission in the mid-20th century, a process that relies on harnessing the energy released by splitting heavy atomic nuclei, represents the pinnacle of our current power technology. This cube operates at an entirely different tier, seemingly bypassing the need for a fuel source altogether. It's the ultimate clean energy, a tiny, perfect engine that runs on the vacuum of space. Under high magnification, you observe the surface of the cube. It lacks the complex, non-Euclidean etchings of the main casing, but is instead covered in a repeating microscopic lattice pattern. This lattice is so fine that it takes a powerful electron microscope to resolve, and it appears to be a three-dimensional fractal structure, repeating the same pattern at smaller and smaller scales into the material's depth. This fractal geometry is likely the mechanism for its energy harvest, a subtle manipulation of quantum fluctuations that only its non-terrestrial composition can sustain. This discovery provides a terrifying quirky tidbit for the history books. For decades, theorists in physics have toyed with the idea of a Dyson sphere, or a Kardashev-scale civilization, categorizing alien species by their energy consumption. A Type II civilization, for instance, could theoretically harness the total energy output of its star. This cube suggests that the civilization that built it has progressed beyond harnessing energy to manufacturing it from the geometry of space itself, a level of technology so profound it redefines the very concept of power. Dr. Thorne, usually reserved, excitedly points to the thermal imaging screen. Look, the heat gradient. It's not radiating out heat, it's absorbing ambient thermal energy in a precise localized radius and converting it to maintain its internal state. It's an antithermos. It pulls warmth in, but not to heat itself, to stay cold. It's a perfect entropy sink. The implications are staggering. This silent cube is a self-regulating, energy-producing unit that has maintained its functionality for millions of years. It's not just a relic, it's a tiny, perfect machine that has been running in the dark for longer than the dinosaurs have been gone. The scholarly debate phrase that the historians will have to contend with will be, historians still argue whether a civilization's lifespan is ultimately limited by resource depletion and environmental collapse, or if true technological mastery allows for perpetual self-sustainability. This object is a compelling physical argument that the latter is achievable, at least on a smaller scale. It suggests a civilization that has utterly conquered the concept of scarcity. A slight, almost accidental bump from a nearby monitoring station causes a minute fluctuation in the cube's field. For a split second, the pulsing light on its surface intensifies, and the coldness around it drops sharply. The instruments go wild, and an unexpected sound is picked up by a seismic sensor placed near the table. A brief, low-frequency hum, too deep to be heard by the human ear, but clearly registered by the machine. It's a sonic signature, not a random noise. Lena manages to capture the frequency and digitally amplify it. It is a repeating, complex waveform. It's not language, nor is it music. It's a pattern, a mathematical sine wave overlaid with an incredibly intricate modulating pulse. It's a technological signature, perhaps a remnant of a diagnostic or an operational pulse. You recognize the same complex nonlinear mathematics in the waveform that you saw etched into the larger casing. This waveform suggests that the cube might not just be a power source, it could be the core processor or a central data storage unit. The energy generation is merely a side effect of its primary function, to store or process information in a state of absolute perpetual order. The realization hits you with the chill of the cube itself. You may be looking at the brain of the object, silent for 3 million years, now briefly jostled awake by a clumsy human elbow. The ethical burden of this tiny, perfect object is immense. To what extent should you attempt to use this power source? Even an attempt to replicate its simplest function would jump humanity ahead by thousands of years, offering clean, sustainable energy on a scale never imagined. But you also know that any uncontrolled interaction could have disastrous consequences, turning a 3 million-year-old relic into an existential threat. The sheer complexity of its physics means that any earthly attempt to interface with it will be fraught with peril, like trying to plug a complex quantum computer into a 1950s wall socket. You step away, rubbing your temples. The cube rests on the table, its dark silver surface pulsing softly, utterly indifferent to the philosophical and scientific turmoil it has unleashed. It's a perfect, silent monument to a technology we can't even dream of yet. A piece of a cosmic jigsaw puzzle that may contain more danger than enlightenment. You feel a profound sense of temporal isolation. We are millions of years too young to understand the gift or the warning it represents. The quiet hum in the air is the sound of 3 million years of waiting. The relentless media firestorm and the fervent, yet largely uninformed global reaction mean your team's most crucial task is now the credibility test. Every finding, from the 3 million-year-old dating to the eerie perfection of the silent cube, is viewed through the harsh, cynical lens of history's greatest archaeological deceptions. You know that if the world's major scientific bodies can find even a single minor inconsistency, the entire discovery will be permanently dismissed as the biggest, most elaborate fake since the dawn of journalism. You spend a day in intensive closed-door sessions with Dr. Thorne and the heads of the geological and physics teams, reviewing every piece of evidence. The atmosphere is tense, thick with the pressure of global scrutiny. The mantra is absolute, surgical transparency. You must preempt the inevitable accusations by being hypercritical of your own work. The first line of defence is a deep dive into the historical record of archaeological hoaxes. You recall, as a mainstream historical fact, the famous lying stones of Beringer. In the early 18th century, German scientist Johann Beringer was shown hundreds of stones engraved with images of animals, celestial bodies, and Hebrew letters, supposedly ancient fossils. Tragically, they were a meticulous forgery planted by his jealous colleagues to humiliate him. Beringer was so convinced of their authenticity that he published a magnificent detailed book on the finds before the truth was revealed, forever tarnishing his reputation. The lesson is chillingly clear. Intellectual pride and the desire for validation can blind even the sharpest minds. Your team rigorously reviews the site's chain of custody. Who was the first person to touch the object? Was the excavation site ever unmonitored? Could an object like the casing or the cube, with its unique properties, have been fabricated in a modern lab and planted? The unanimous answer from your internal security team is no. The sedimentary layers, dated to the Pliocene-Pleistocene boundary, were undisturbed, with the matrix of caliche rock forming a continuous seal over the main body. For someone to have planted the artifact, they would have had to tunnel through 30 feet of solid, millions of years old rock, place the item, and then somehow refill the void with rock that perfectly matched the geological and paleomagnetic signature of the surrounding strata. It is functionally impossible, a greater feat of engineering than the artifact's presumed arrival itself. You also instruct Lena to reanalyze the non-terrestrial isotopic signature of the casing. Critics argue the trace isotopes might be contamination from a poorly maintained field spectrometer, but Lena's report confirms that the anomalous elements are structurally integrated into the material's lattice, not sitting on the surface. They are the foundation of the metal, not the dirt on the metal. You recall a light joke made by one of the younger geologists. It's not contamination, it's a feature. The universe is just trying to gaslight us into thinking this is normal. The credibility test also requires acknowledging and addressing the quirky tidbit of other, less convincing OOPARTS. For instance, the famous Iron Pillar of Delhi, erected around 400 CE, is celebrated for its incredible resistance to corrosion, a property that baffled scientists for decades until its high phosphorus content and unique atmospheric exposure were identified as the terrestrial key. If this desert artifact possessed any known terrestrial metallurgical explanation, however improbable, the skeptics would seize on it. But the cube's non-Euclidean geometry and its constant low-level power generation simply have no earthly analogue, historical or contemporary. The scholarly debate phrase that you anticipate will dominate the global news cycle is, Historians still argue whether the burden of proof for an anomalous find rests on the discoverer to prove its authenticity, or on the skeptic to prove its falsehood. In practice, you know the burden is entirely yours. You must supply data that not only stands up to scrutiny, but actively breaks the skeptic's framework of reference. This is where the silent cube proves to be the most potent piece of evidence. Unlike the large casing, which could theoretically be mistaken for a massive meteorite, a claim easily countered by its shape, the cube's functional nature is undeniable. You decide to leak a controlled, high-resolution video of the cube's thermal signature, its constant localized ambient heat absorption, to a consortium of international independent physics institutes. You challenge them to find a known terrestrial mechanism, past or present, that can achieve this effect. You are essentially throwing down the gauntlet. Disprove the impossible power source. The video leak is a calculated risk. It shifts the argument from "is it old?" to "does it work?" If the world's physicists can't explain the cube's continuous energy field based on known laws, their skepticism dissolves into professional helplessness. You also spend time carefully documenting the local indigenous elders' testimony. While anecdotal and unscientific, their stories, remember the dark, cool vessels from the eye of the scorpion, add a layer of cultural depth that modern scientific deceit rarely incorporates. By treating their oral history with respect and recording it accurately, you demonstrate that this is not a hurried grab for fame, but a meticulous multidisciplinary investigation into a profound event. The core of the strategy is simple: overwhelm with data. Every isotope reading, every geological sample, every thermal image, and every microfracture analysis is packaged into an exhaustive, open-source database. You are creating a digital monument to the truth, a resource so vast and self-consistent that anyone wishing to debunk the find would have to essentially invent a new branch of physics and geology to do so. You allow yourself a moment of tired contemplation. This whole episode is a profound reminder that human history is as much about what we exclude as what we include. We rely on Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. But what if the simplest explanation, that an alien craft crashed here 3 million years ago, is also the most terrifying and the hardest for the collective human psyche to accept? You make a final light joke to Thorne before sending off the documentation packages. Well, if they still think it's a hoax after all this, maybe we should just claim it's a revolutionary new brand of millennia-old, non-corroding crocodile dung sunscreen that might get them to stop arguing and start buying. Thorne manages a weak smile, remembering the absurdities of ancient Egyptian cosmetic practices. The truth is, the pressure to maintain credibility in the face of the impossible is enormous, but your team has built an unshakable fortress of data around the truth. The artifact is validated. Now the real work of understanding it begins, with the artifact's age and authenticity secured by overwhelming geological and physical data. The focus shifts inward, specifically to communication. Etched onto the surface of the large metallic casing, and now faintly visible on the sides of the primary excavation trench, are thousands of intricate, shimmering lines you first noticed. These are the impossible symbols, and they present a linguistic puzzle that makes the Rosetta Stone look like a children's flashcard. You are now in the makeshift digital lab, staring at high-resolution three-dimensional scans of the symbols. They are not alphabetical, nor do they conform to any known logographic system. The kind of writing where symbols represent words or phrases, like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs or Chinese characters. Instead, they operate on a level that suggests they encode concepts directly into a visual geometric form. The symbols resist all attempts to find terrestrial linguistic correlations. Your team of cryptographers and linguists, drawn from universities and intelligence agencies around the world, tries every trick in the book. Frequency analysis, phonetic mapping, comparisons to every dead and living language, and even abstract pattern recognition algorithms. They all fail. The symbols are non-repeating, yet clearly follow a rigid internal logic. They don't appear to represent sounds or discrete words. They seem to depict mathematical relationships and four-dimensional spatial concepts. Dr. Elias Thorne, looking less like an archaeologist and more like a man contemplating the crushing futility of human intellect, explains the problem. It's like they aren't writing to be read, but to be understood. They bypass the need for an arbitrary sound or a learned symbol. They are the information itself, visualized. You recall a mainstream historical fact about the development of human writing. It typically evolved from simple pictograms, drawings representing objects, to ideograms, symbols representing ideas, and eventually to phonetic systems, symbols representing sounds. This progression took thousands of years, a slow march toward abstraction. These alien symbols leapfrog that entire process. They are a kind of concept script, using geometry to express meaning directly to the brain, bypassing the fragile conventional human process of translation. One pattern, for example, looks like a complex geometric spiral made of interlocking cubes. When a physicist studies the pattern, he realizes it precisely maps the propagation of a non-terrestrial isotope through the casing's lattice structure. The symbol is the molecular diagram, the process, and the chemical properties, all encoded in one visual representation. It's an instruction manual written in the language of physics. This intense focus on the symbols brings up a fascinating quirky tidbit. The Voynich manuscript, an illustrated codex from the 15th century, remains an undeciphered mystery, written in an unknown language and alphabet. Its failure to be cracked has led many to believe it's either an elaborate hoax or a communication from a culture so isolated its language has no terrestrial parallels. The alien symbols, however, are not undecipherable in the Voynich sense. They're unreadable in the human sense. They speak in a syntax of space and time, not grammar. The cryptographic team introduces an AI specialised in non-alphabetic patterns. The AI, after weeks of processing, delivers a single cryptic report. The symbols appear to be alive. They subtly shift and reconfigure themselves over time, like a liquid lattice, making permanent translation impossible. This explains the shimmering effect you saw earlier. The symbols aren't static. They're a pulsing informational field, storing and maybe even transmitting data through their geometry. You momentarily step away from the overwhelming intellectual complexity to make a light joke to yourself. Maybe this is just a very, very old, interstellar form of technical support chat, and all these symbols just translate to, "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" But the sheer weight of the implied meaning quickly brings you back to reality. The key to unlocking the symbols, the team slowly realizes, lies in finding a repeating element, a kind of Rosetta Stone key that bridges their language to ours. They isolate a pattern that appears multiple times in different contexts. It's a configuration of lines that, when rendered in 3D, creates a visualization of a gravitational singularity, a black hole. This is the first verifiable cross-cultural concept, a universally recognizable physical phenomenon. If that complex pattern means black hole, what does the surrounding script mean? The symbols near the black hole image seem to be arrayed around a simple, 7-pointed star graphic. The cryptographers immediately flag the star. 7 points, 7 planets, 7 stars, 7 dimensions. This is where the scholarly debate phrase that will inevitably define this linguistic breakthrough emerges. Historians still argue whether language is a purely cultural construct, or if there is a universal underlying mathematical syntax that governs all forms of complex communication. This find suggests a powerful answer. Mathematics and physics are the universal language. The aliens wrote a sentence, and that sentence is a physics equation. You hypothesize that the symbols are a form of hypercompressed data storage, a way to record vast amounts of information, perhaps the ship's log, its origin or its destination, without the need for bulky, conventional hardware. The casing is not merely a hull, it's an external hard drive, inscribed millions of years ago, waiting for a compatible intellect to read it. The breakthrough happens not in the lab but in a brief, accidental observation. One of the linguists notices that when a powerful UV light is shone onto the symbols, a secondary set of symbols appears, faint and underlying the primary script. These secondary symbols do have a mathematical structured grid. The team realizes the primary script is the text, and the secondary script is the key, a standardized grid system that acts as the cipher for the geometric concepts. The 7-pointed star, when analysed against this newly discovered grid, is revealed to be a precise angular map. It is not an artistic depiction of a star system, it is a stellar coordinate catalogue centred on a distinct solar neighbourhood. The star's angular position, trajectory and apparent magnitude are all encoded in the adjacent symbols. You feel a profound sense of temporal vertigo. You're standing in a remote desert, reading a 3 million-year-old message, a cosmic note in a bottle. The message is simple, yet overwhelming. We came from here. The next, urgent step is clear. Take those coordinates and turn them over to the astronomers. You need to know the identity of that star system and its distance. The symbols are not just a linguistic puzzle, they are the first contact. The silence of the desert is about to be broken by a flash of light from across the galaxy. The linguistic puzzle of the impossible symbols is cracked, not by finding a dictionary, but by finding a star chart. The 7-pointed star graphic, when referenced against the underlying grid structure of the secondary symbols, translates into a precise set of three-dimensional stellar coordinates. This is the ultimate archaeological key, the coordinates of the alien homeworld, encoded in metal for 3 million years. You rush the data, raw angular coordinates, spectral signatures, and estimated magnitude, to the astronomical team, who are working out of a temporary heavily shielded observatory tent set up far from the magnetic interference of the main dig site. The atmosphere here is different, less frantic, more deeply, cerebrally engaged. They are dealing with light years and galactic quadrants, not dusty stratigraphy. The astronomers feed the numbers into their most powerful digitally corrected stellar databases. The tension in the tent is palpable, a heavy silence broken only by the whirring of computer cooling fans. Minutes crawl by like geological eras. Finally, a younger astronomer with a wild shock of red hair shouts, "We have a match!" It's a Type G main sequence star, about 450 light-years from here, in the outer fringe of the Orion Arm. The designation is sterile, a catalogue number, but the implication is anything but. You now have a return address. Your mind immediately begins cross-referencing this location with ancient astronomical and mythological records. This is where the work of generations of scholars, often dismissed as merely cultural studies, suddenly becomes critical. You recall a mainstream historical fact regarding the meticulous efforts of ancient civilizations to map the heavens. The Babylonians, as early as the 2nd millennium BCE, were already creating complex ephemerides, predicting planetary movements and eclipses with astonishing accuracy. They treated the stars as a celestial calendar and a guide for earthly events. But you're looking for something more specific than charts. You're looking for memory of the star people. You pull up data on the indigenous oral traditions. They spoke of the eye of the scorpion, which when traced backwards in time and filtered through the necessary cultural lens, corresponds precisely to a bright star near the constellation Scorpius. The alien coordinate system, however, points to a star in the adjacent quadrant, but in the same galactic neighbourhood. It seems the local ancestors were slightly imprecise, conflating the closest bright celestial landmark with the actual dimmer star of origin. The mythical narrative suddenly aligns terrifyingly well with the scientific catalogue. You find another chilling convergence, a quirky tidbit from the mythology of the Dogon people in West Africa. This isolated culture maintains an intricate knowledge of the Sirius star system, including the existence of Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye. Their detailed knowledge, which predates Western telescopic discovery of Sirius B, has long been a source of fascination and fringe speculation. While the alien object is not from Sirius, the Dogon case highlights a pattern. Some ancient cultures seem to possess detailed, accurate celestial knowledge that defies terrestrial origin, suggesting intermittent contact or observation. The scholarly debate phrase that the historians will have to grapple with now is, historians still argue whether the astronomical anomalies found in ancient texts are the result of independent, advanced observational techniques lost to time, or if they represent preserved records of contact with external, non-indigenous knowledge systems. The star chart, encoded in the metallic casing, provides overwhelming evidence for the latter. The next realization is terrifying. The symbols around the star coordinates aren't merely descriptive, they appear to be a historical timeline. The cryptographers managed to isolate symbols that seem to function as temporal markers, an alien kind of date. They point to the time of impact, 3 million years ago, but also to a time before impact, a launch date perhaps, and crucially, they seem to indicate a future celestial event related to that star system. This future reference could be anything: a return window, a cyclical migratory route, or a warning. The symbols translate very roughly to a phrase that suggests alignment or conjunction relative to the Sun, Earth, and their home star, scheduled for some point in the distant future. It's not an imminent arrival, but a planned rendezvous, or maybe a marker meant to be read much, much later. You lean against a console trying to process the timeline. The people who built this crashed here when our ancestors were still chipping away at rocks, and their navigation system contains an appointment millions of years in the future. Their concept of time is simply gargantuan, a leisurely stride through the eons that makes human history seem like a frantic momentary twitch. You make a tired, slightly hysterical light joke. Well, that's just rude. They leave a mess, and then set an alarm clock for 3 million years later. Couldn't they have just sent a Do Not Disturb sign? The irony is that the object's presence is the ultimate Do Not Disturb sign, ensuring that any subsequent arrivals would immediately know the history of the place. The deeper analysis of the symbols suggests they are also a map of the internal mechanism, including a complex diagram showing the relationship between the Silent Cube's power source and the ship's primary propulsion. It's an instruction manual written in the language of physics, a user guide for an engine that manipulates space-time. It also confirms that the strange material, with its impossible isotopes, was integral to the propulsion method, functioning as a kind of warp field generator. The casing is not just a remnant of a crash. It is a 3 million year old message stating, "We were here, this is where we came from, and this is how we travel." The sheer weight of that cosmic introduction is almost enough to crush the spirit. You now possess the coordinates to an alien civilization, a piece of knowledge so profound and potentially dangerous that its mere existence threatens to destabilize global society. The final realization of the astronomers is the most unsettling. They recheck the trajectory data encoded in the symbols, comparing the calculated path of the star system 3 million years ago to its current position, accounting for a galactic drift. The symbols are incredibly accurate. They are a navigational snapshot from the moment the ship crashed. The precision is terrifying. The silent message from the desert floor is clear. We know where you live, and perhaps 3 million years from now, you will know where we are. The intellectual breakthrough of decrypting the stellar coordinates gives way to a bizarre ground-level observation. The artifact is subtly, yet profoundly, influencing its immediate environment. Specifically, the team begins to document a strange, accelerating growth and mutation of plant life, the local flora, immediately surrounding the buried metallic casing and the extraction points of the Silent Cube. Initially, the observation was dismissed as an anomaly, perhaps an unexpected concentration of groundwater near the excavation pit, but the effect is far too localized and too aggressive to be explained by simple hydration. You take a walk around the newly expanded perimeter fence, noticing the distinct boundary where normal brittle high desert scrub ends, and a patch of unnaturally vibrant, almost luminous green begins. The plants closest to the main burial trench, a type of tough, low-lying desert sage, are exhibiting impossible rates of growth. They are reaching heights 3 times their average. Their root systems are penetrating the hard caliche rock layer with a strange ease, and their leaves are a deep, unnaturally verdant shade, absorbing sunlight at hyper-efficient rates. The most disturbing observation, however, is the mutation. You kneel beside a cluster of these accelerated plants, noting that their biological structures are subtly altered. The internal venation of the leaves, when examined under a portable microscope, displays a crystalline-like structure, far more ordered and geometrically precise than normal plant cells. Furthermore, the plants are producing novel alkaloids, complex organic compounds that are entirely unknown to terrestrial biology. These are not merely supersized versions of desert sage. They are, chemically and structurally, a new species being born in real time. Lena, the isotope specialist, is now working with a botanist, sampling the soil and the plant tissues. The soil analysis reveals trace amounts of the non-terrestrial isotopes that make up the casing, having leached or perhaps actively radiated into the immediate Earth over millions of years. But the concentration is too low to explain the violent mutation through simple chemical poisoning. The team posits that the source must be the energy field itself. The Silent Cube, the engine of anti-entropy, is likely generating a continuous low-level field of coherent energy. This field, while too weak to directly affect human tissues, at least noticeably, is providing the local flora with a kind of perfect energy input, allowing for highly ordered, rapid cellular replication without the usual expenditure of biological energy. It's as if the alien energy field is forcing biological complexity and accelerated evolution, a low-grade, constant push toward perfection. This finding ties into a mainstream historical fact regarding the history of life on Earth. The Cambrian explosion, approximately 541 million years ago, was a relatively rapid appearance of most major animal phyla in the fossil record. While the causes are debated, often centering on oxygenation levels or genetic shifts, it represents a historical period of intense, rapid biological diversification and complexity. This localized effect around the artifact is a microscopic controlled Cambrian explosion occurring on a remote desert plateau, driven by an artificial non-terrestrial energy source. The most unnerving manifestation of this hypergrowth is a patch of mutated grass growing directly over where the silent cube was unearthed. The blades of grass are a shocking, vibrant purple, and they seem to weave themselves into intricate, non-random patterns on the ground. When the botanist maps these patterns, they are not natural spirals or chaotic tangles. They appear to mimic the geometric etchings found on the main metallic casing. The plant life is, essentially, growing the alien script. You joke to yourself that maybe the aliens didn't just crash. They brought a special brand of interstellar fertilizer with them. But the profound implication remains. The alien technology is not merely inert. It is an active, persistent source of organised complexity and accelerated evolution. This naturally leads to a quirky tidbit from the world of fringe biology, the concept of panspermia, the theory that life or the seeds of life exist throughout the universe and are constantly being distributed via asteroids, comets, or even alien vessels. While this artifact didn't necessarily bring life, the plants were already here, it brought a powerful catalyst for life, a perfect energy source that can drive evolution to radical new outcomes. The technology is seeding a tiny 3-million-year-old garden of the impossible. The team is now grappling with the scholarly debate phrase that will characterize this biological anomaly. Historians still argue whether the evolution of life is a purely stochastic, random process governed by mutation and selection, or if there is an underlying, ordered principle driving complexity towards predetermined, mathematically achievable outcomes. The artifact's influence, the forced order and complexity on the local flora, suggests a strong bias toward the latter. The alien technology is demonstrating that a small, focused input of anti-entropic energy can radically accelerate and organize biological evolution. The ethical consideration here is massive. Should the team attempt to study these mutated plants in a controlled lab, or is there a risk of releasing the genetically altered flora into the wider ecosystem, creating an invasive, super-efficient species that could outcompete all terrestrial plants? The decision is made to maintain a strict biological quarantine, treating the luminous green patch not as a curiosity, but as a dangerous, contained biological contamination. As you stand by the fence watching the mutated sage, you realize the artifact's persistence is the most frightening thing of all. For 3 million years it has sat there silently working, turning the local geology into an external hard drive, accelerating evolution, and subtly rewriting the local physics. This is not a dead ship, it is a slow-burn ecological engine. The realization that an advanced alien technology, even in its state of disrepair, can so easily and profoundly alter the genetic destiny of a planet's life forms is a sobering thought. It reframes the entire concept of contact. This wasn't just a ship that crashed. It was a time capsule of power that has been subtly influencing the history of this patch of desert for longer than humanity has been human. The whispers of the high desert sand were not just the wind, but the sound of accelerated, geometrically perfect growth. The silent cube sitting under heavy guard is not merely a power source, it is a universal genetic catalyst. The world is about to realize that the discovery is not just historical, but actively biological and potentially dangerous. The initial phase of the discovery, the shock, the scientific validation, the media frenzy and the local biological oddity, now abruptly gives way to a new, chilling phase: containment. The moment the team confirmed the coordinates of an alien homeworld and detected the accelerating biological effects on the local flora, the discovery ceased to be a mere archaeological find and became a matter of global security and strategic importance. You're sitting in the communications tent when the air crackles with a kind of anticipatory dread. The high-level political response, which had previously been confined to sceptical press releases, materialized physically in the form of a convoy. You hear the distant, heavy thrum of military helicopters. Not the small civilian kind you've been using, but large, unmistakable Black Hawk transports. The arrival is less of a delegation and more of an invasion. Within minutes, the remote desert plateau is swarming with personnel in unmarked dark grey uniforms. These aren't local troops. They are highly disciplined, specialised units who move with an unnerving efficiency. They immediately establish a massive circular exclusion zone, pushing your weary, dusty team back with polite but firm authority. High-gain satellite dishes are erected, a secure, military-grade perimeter fence goes up in hours, and the sky above the dig site becomes a permanently restricted airspace. This is the manifestation of secret government interest, not a single government, but a high-level, multinational body operating under the cloak of plausible deniability. You recognise the face of one of the leading figures, a severe, silver-haired man known only by his codename, the Overseer, a fixture in shadowy intelligence committees. His job is not to study the artifact, but to isolate, control, and, if necessary, weaponize it. Dr. Thorne, visibly furious and exhausted, attempts to argue with the Overseer, protesting the sudden seizure of the site and the interruption of scientific inquiry. "This is a find for all of humanity," Thorne shouts, his voice cracking with emotion and desert dust. The Overseer doesn't raise his voice, merely offering a cold, definitive response. "Doctor, this ceased being a matter of history the moment your instruments confirmed a destination. It is now a matter of national defence, existential risk, and the control of non-terrestrial technology." You realise the profound shift in perspective. To you, it's a 3 million-year-old message. To them, it's a technological roadmap to a civilization 450 light-years away. The silent cube, the engine of anti-entropy, is no longer a scientific curiosity. It's the ultimate energy source, a geopolitical king's prize that could instantly upend the global balance of power. This moment ties directly into a key mainstream historical fact regarding strategic asset control. Following the conclusion of World War II, the immediate global power dynamic shifted heavily toward those nations that secured and exploited German rocket science and nuclear research. The race to acquire that advanced strategic technology dictated the early course of the Cold War. In a contemporary context, the alien artifact represents a technological leap, several orders of magnitude greater than rocketry or fission, making the government's aggressive containment effort an entirely predictable, if terrifying, move. You observe the military teams meticulously mapping the perimeter. They are not just using terrestrial sensors. They are deploying equipment specifically designed to monitor for anomalous energy fields, suggesting that they have been tracking OPAT anomalies for a long time, quietly waiting for something real to surface. The team is officially given 2 options: leave immediately or sign non-disclosure agreements that effectively make them employees of this shadowy agency, stripping them of all intellectual property rights and confining them to the site under strict military supervision. The choice is a moral and professional agony, but you know that leaving means forfeiting any chance of continuing the scientific study. Reluctantly, you join Thorne and Lena in signing the documents. You're no longer archaeologists. You're highly specialised imprisoned consultants. This intense secrecy and subsequent militarisation echo a fascinating, quirky tidbit found in some early Cold War documents. The rumoured existence of Project Blue Book's Special Report 14, which supposedly detailed a small fraction of UFO sightings that defied conventional explanation, but whose findings were allegedly suppressed for fear of public panic and, crucially, technological insecurity. The desert dig has now moved beyond the realm of rumour and into the realm of confirmed high-stakes existential classification. A light joke bubbles up in your mind, a way to deal with the surreal situation. You think of telling one of the grim-faced military guards that you're worried about the mutated sagebrush trying to stage a botanical jailbreak, but you restrain yourself. They clearly lack a sense of humour, especially concerning rapidly evolving alien-influenced plant life. The scholarly debate phrase that will haunt the geopolitical halls of power in the coming decades will be, historians still argue whether the discovery of advanced external technology should be immediately shared as a global common heritage, or if its immense strategic and disruptive potential necessitates initial control by a protective central authority. The decision has been made for you: control, secrecy, and containment, all justified by the catastrophic potential of uncontrolled release. The military engineers begin installing vast underground magnetic shielding around the site, specifically targeting the silent cube's persistent energy field. They are attempting to isolate the non-entropic effect, not to study it, but to prevent its subtle, accelerating influence on the environment from spreading, and to ensure that any potential signal transmission from the artifact is completely jammed. This suggests a terrifying possibility, that the artifact isn't just a record of a crash, but a dormant beacon capable of sending a distress or positional signal across interstellar space. The sight of the pristine, cool metal of the casing, now surrounded by camouflage netting, sandbags, and armed guards, is a visual metaphor for the shift in humanity's fate. Science has given way to strategy. Curiosity has been supplanted by fear. The secret government has arrived, and the whispers of the desert are now drowned out by the metallic clanking of boots and the low, constant thrum of power generators designed for one purpose: to keep the cosmic truth locked down, silent, and entirely within their control. You realize your freedom is gone, but the adventure is just beginning, albeit one now played out under the cold, watchful eye of the state. The sudden, heavy blanket of military containment and secrecy does more than just curtail your freedom. It precipitates a profound moral and professional crisis. You are now working under duress, fully aware that the cosmic truth you have uncovered, the 3 million-year-old artifact, the non-terrestrial coordinates, and the anti-entropic power source, is being weaponized by the very people sworn to protect the public. The core conflict is the ethics of unveiling cosmic truth. Who owns this knowledge, and who decides if humanity is ready for it? You sit in a cramped temporary office, now stripped of any personal belongings and guarded at all times, reviewing the documents the military agency has produced. They justify the total lockdown and secrecy based on two primary risks: social disruption and technological imbalance. They argue that revealing the existence of a civilization 450 light-years away that visited Earth before humans were fully formed would instantly shatter every major religion, destabilize global financial markets, and create an uncontrollable mass panic. Their goal is not malice, but paternalism. They believe humanity is too fragile to handle the reality of our cosmic insignificance. The second argument, the one that chills you the most, is the technological risk. The silent cube is the ultimate prize. If the blueprint for a perfect perpetual energy source falls into the hands of a single nation-state, it guarantees absolute geopolitical dominance, effectively ending all forms of conventional warfare and ushering in an era of technological tyranny. The military's position is that the safest place for such power is under the absolute centralized control of a high-level multinational containment authority, a group of people who trust only themselves. Doctor Thorne paces the small room, his hands running through his already chaotic hair. "This is the ultimate betrayal of science," he whispers. "Science is a shared endeavour. Truth is a communal right. They've turned the biggest discovery in human history into the biggest secret." You try to ground yourself by recalling a mainstream historical fact related to the social impact of major scientific shifts. For example, the Copernican revolution in the 16th and 17th centuries, which established the sun as the centre of the solar system, profoundly challenged the theological and philosophical dogma of the time, leading to widespread upheaval and, for thinkers like Galileo, persecution. That was merely a rearrangement of the planets. This discovery is a rearrangement of our entire self-perception, a proof that we are not the pinnacle of creation, or even the first intelligent visitors to our own planet. The potential for disruption is exponentially greater. You also consider a quirky tidbit from the history of discovery: the story of the Piri Reis map, 1513 CE, a famous Ottoman map that allegedly depicts the coast of Antarctica long before its official discovery and mapping in the 19th century, potentially showing it without ice cover. Fringe theories suggest it could be evidence of a lost global civilization or access to ancient superior geographic knowledge. While its source is debated, the fascination with the map shows humanity's deep psychological readiness to accept that our historical record is incomplete, but that acceptance usually comes only after the original discoverers are safely dead and the evidence is safely obscure. Your find is neither obscure nor easily dismissed. The scholarly debate phrase that you now live within is a moral one. Historians still argue whether the pursuit of knowledge should ever be constrained by the potential for social harm, or if intellectual freedom is an absolute good, regardless of consequence. The military answers this with a resounding preference for constraint, trading intellectual freedom for perceived global stability. You find a dark, resigned humour in the situation the kind that only exhaustion and existential dread can produce. You offer a light joke to Thorn. Don't worry, Doctor. When they finally release the sanitized version of this story, they'll probably say the Silent Cube was just a very large, non-corroding alien paperweight, and the non-Euclidean geometry was just bad architectural planning. But the joke falls flat, because the ethical dilemma is real and persistent. You have a moral duty to the truth, to the scientific community, and to the billions of people whose understanding of their own existence is now fundamentally wrong. Yet, you are prevented from speaking by armed guards and signed legal agreements. You are a repository of the world's most explosive secret. The team begins to engage in subtle acts of intellectual sabotage and preservation. They intentionally make several redundancies in their digital files, creating multiple, encrypted copies of all the key data, the isotopic analysis, the geometry reports, and the stellar coordinates, and storing them in locations that the military's sweeping data collection might overlook. These are not attempts to leak the information immediately, but to create a fail-safe, ensuring that if the government agency destroys the physical evidence or permanently wipes the data, the truth will survive. This act of defiance is born from the realization that the ethics of stewardship demand it. You are the caretakers of a 3 million-year-old cosmic message. You cannot, in good conscience, allow it to become merely a weapon or a forgotten secret in the dusty archives of a paranoid government agency. The message was preserved for millennia by indifference and geology. It must not be lost now due to political fear. The Silent Cube, resting in its containment field, is the silent, cold core of this ethical crisis. It represents the ultimate power, an end to scarcity, pollution, and the entire energy economy. But the agency sees only the ultimate leverage. The simple existence of the cube forces humanity to confront its own immaturity, the undeniable temptation to use an unlimited power source, not for universal good, but for exclusive competitive advantage. You look at the armed guard outside your door, his face a mask of weary professionalism. He is merely following orders, part of the apparatus of secrecy. The true battle is not against the soldier, but against the fear of the unknown that motivates his superiors. The ethical duty is clear. The truth of our place in the cosmos belongs to everyone, and you must find a way to honour that truth without immediately plunging the world into chaos. The burden of the cosmic secret is far heavier than the feather-like casing itself. The only way forward is to continue working, continue documenting, and continue preparing the truth for its eventual inevitable unveiling. The military and government agency personnel who have seized the site are not content merely to contain the artifact. Their prime objective is to master it. Your team of scientists, now working under the constant watchful eyes of specialised engineers and tactical officers, is ordered to execute a series of tests aimed at deconstruction and replication. The underlying directive is simple: break the casing, access the interior, and understand the physics of the Silent Cube well enough to build a terrestrial version. The environment immediately shifts from an archaeological dig to a high-security, ultra-secret industrial laboratory. Massive, reinforced testing apparatus is flown in, designed to apply forces far beyond what nature or any terrestrial material could withstand. The metallic casing, which has resisted 3 million years of geology, is now subjected to the pinnacle of human destructive technology. The initial attempts at deconstruction focus on the most conventional method: thermal attack, a focused, plasma arc torch, capable of reaching temperatures similar to the surface of the Sun, is directed at a small, isolated section of the casing. You watch the heat signature build on the thermal monitors, the plasma licking at the dark silver surface. Nothing happens. The metal remains cool to the touch. The heat energy simply dissipates or is actively rejected by the non-Euclidean geometry of the material, which seems to warp the energy flow around itself. It is the perfect, active thermal shield. Next, they try brute force. A hydraulic press designed to crush industrial diamonds is brought to bear on a carefully chosen point of the main hull. The press delivers an unimaginable amount of force, enough to shear through metre-thick steel armour. The team monitors the stress fields within the casing, expecting a catastrophic failure or at least a crack. Instead, the force is distributed instantaneously and perfectly throughout the object's structure. The hydraulic piston, a marvel of terrestrial engineering, crumples like cheap aluminum foil. The casing remains pristine, mocking our most aggressive attempts at penetration. You feel a strange sense of vindication for the silent 3 million-year-old traveller. This spectacular failure connects to a crucial mainstream historical fact regarding material science. The widespread use of steel became prevalent only after the Bessemer process was industrialised in the mid-19th century, allowing for cheap mass production of a strong, durable alloy. The entire history of human construction, from skyscrapers to battle tanks, relies on our ability to manipulate iron and carbon. This alien metal exists in a different universe of material science, one where atoms themselves are arranged to defy common physical laws. The physicists then turn their attention to the silent cube, focusing not on breaking it, but on replication. The goal is to isolate the principles of its anti-entropic energy field. They meticulously analyse the subtle quantum fluctuations around the cube, trying to identify the mechanism by which it taps into zero-point energy. They build scaled-down experimental reactors using Earth-based non-conductive materials and exotic elements like hafnium, attempting to mimic the cube's fractal three-dimensional lattice structure. Every experiment fails. The terrestrial materials cannot maintain the required geometric stability, and the energy input they do receive is negligible, instantly dissipating back into the background noise of the universe. The team comes to the agonizing conclusion that the cube's function is inextricably linked to its non-terrestrial isotopic composition, the elements with impossible ratios that Lena identified. You can't replicate the technology unless you can first synthesize the alien elements, a feat that requires physics mastery far beyond our current capabilities. You recall a light joke that one of the frustrated engineers made after another failed test. It's like trying to build a modern jet fighter using only clay and wooden wheels. The plans are there, but the materials just don't exist in our toolbox. This leads to a fascinating yet frustrating quirky tidbit. The concept of the Philosopher's Stone in alchemy, an object that was purportedly capable of transmuting base metals into gold and creating the elixir of life. This silent cube, with its ability to create energy from nothing and maintain its own integrity for millions of years, is the real-life realization of that mythological object, achieving a kind of technological transmutation that is impossible using known earthly methods. The overall consensus, a bitter pill for the military command, is one of total failure. The alien material is simply immune to human aggression and ingenuity. It cannot be cut, drilled, melted, or replicated. It is a technological wall, silently asserting the vast, humbling superiority of its makers. The scholarly debate phrase that crystallizes this moment of defeat is, historians still argue whether technological breakthroughs are primarily incremental steps built upon existing knowledge, or if true, paradigm-shifting progress requires a complete, intellectual leap into entirely new domains of physics and mathematics. This artifact is a solid piece of evidence for the latter. It is a technological endpoint for a set of physics principles that we haven't even begun to discover. In a desperate final attempt at deconstruction, the Overseer authorizes the use of a focused subatomic particle accelerator beam, a last resort highly dangerous test. The beam, designed to shatter molecular bonds, is fired at the casing. The casing absorbs the beam. The internal sensors show a momentary infinitesimal ripple in the geometric structure, a flicker of resistance, but no damage. Instead, the energy from the particle beam is subtly channeled and then released harmlessly, causing a brief, localized burst of energy that looks like a shower of miniature, intensely bright non-terrestrial photons. The result is terrifyingly instructive. The alien technology is not merely passive, it defends itself by actively manipulating the energy used against it. It is perhaps a self-repairing or self-regulating system. You stand by the shattered remains of the human testing equipment, looking at the smooth, cool, undamaged alien hull. The lesson is clear. For all our mastery over the Earth's elements and our own history, we are still infants in the cosmic nursery. The ethical dilemma of controlling this power is now moot, at least for the time being. We can't control what we can't even scratch. The artifact's silent refusal to yield is perhaps its most profound teaching moment for a species so obsessed with conquest and deconstruction. The frustrating, humbling failure to penetrate or replicate the alien material forces a necessary shift in perspective. If you cannot understand the artifact by breaking it, you must understand it by placing it into context. Your team, confined and now largely working on theoretical analysis, turns to the scattered, ambiguous historical record of similar enigmas. This is the stage of remembering other out-of-place artefacts, parts, the historical footnotes that have long been dismissed, but now feel terrifyingly prescient. You spend hours sifting through old, discredited reports and fringe literature, guided by the cold, hard reality of the desert casing. The fact that the current artefact is 3 million years old, non-terrestrial, and impervious to our best science forces you to re-evaluate every strange find in history that defied its assigned date or context. You recall, for instance, the famous Antikythera mechanism, a complex ancient Greek analogue computer dating from around the 1st century BCE, which you mentioned briefly before. You dive deeper into this mainstream historical fact. Its intricate system of bronze gears was capable of predicting astronomical positions and eclipses, a level of mechanical sophistication not seen again in Western civilization until the 14th century. For decades, its existence baffled historians as it seemed to leapfrog centuries of technological development. The mechanism, though entirely terrestrial, was out of place in its time, suggesting a brief forgotten peak of ingenuity. Now, compared to the desert cube, the Antikythera mechanism feels almost charmingly primitive, but it serves as a philosophical marker. History does contain inexplicable outliers. Next, you move to the more controversial, truly out-of-place objects. You research the so-called Baghdad Battery, a set of terracotta jars, copper cylinders and iron rods discovered in Iraq, dating possibly to the Parthian era, around 150 BCE. Fringe theories argue these were ancient electrical cells, suggesting early knowledge of electrochemistry. While most mainstream archaeologists debate its function, arguing it was merely a storage vessel for scrolls, the idea of a lost technological capability existing far ahead of its official timeline echoes the reality of your current discovery. It shows humanity's recurrent struggle to accept technological regression or interruption. This intellectual exercise is vital to the credibility test that still hangs over the non-military world. By drawing parallels to less extreme, but still historically debated objects, you create a narrative continuity. Your artifact isn't a singular freak event. It is the ultimate proof for a pattern that humanity has been ignoring for centuries. You think of a particularly odd, quirky tidbit, the Klerksdorp spheres, small metallic spheres mined in South Africa, some of which feature 3 parallel grooves running around their circumference. They were reportedly found in pyrophyllite deposits dating back 2.8 billion years. Mainstream geology insists they are naturally occurring mineral formations, concretions. However, their near-perfect shape and alleged internal structure have long captivated OOP art enthusiasts. The age alone is staggering. While the evidence for their artificiality is weak, the possibility that something artificial existed billions of years ago opens the mind to the 3-million-year-old reality you now face. The scholarly debate phrase that connects all these scattered artifacts is, historians still argue whether the concept of a lost civilization possessing high technology should be taken seriously as an explanatory model for historical anomalies, or if it represents an inherent human tendency toward romanticizing the past. The desert artifact rips this argument from the theoretical realm. It proves that a lost superior technological presence existed on Earth. It just wasn't human. Dr. Thorne, finding some grim comfort in the research, notes that the sheer volume of these OOP arts, stretching from the alleged Eltanin antenna at the bottom of the ocean to the debatable Eka stones, suggests a psychological preparedness. We've been rehearsing for this moment for centuries, he says, collecting the pieces of the puzzle we refuse to put together. This desert craft is just the capstone, the piece that completes the terrifying picture. Play, you share a light joke with Lena, noting that maybe all those ancient cultures that left behind the odd OOPART were just victims of terrible shipping and handling, and your 3-million-year-old craft is simply the worst ever instance of lost baggage. The main takeaway from the review of these historical oddities is the understanding of human reaction. Whenever an object defied the established timeline, the reaction was always the same. First, disbelief, then dismissal, hoax, geological anomaly, and finally a marginalisation into the realm of the fringe. The military's current strategy of containment is simply the contemporary high-stakes version of this historical denial. They are trying to marginalise the evidence not by calling it fake, but by calling it too dangerous for public consumption. You realise the profound responsibility of the moment. If this truth is ever to be fully unveiled, it must be accompanied by the context of these other artifacts, showing that the universe has been dropping clues on Earth for a very long time. Your artifact is not the start of the story, but the shocking climax of a cosmic narrative that has been quietly unfolding across millennia. By connecting it to the whispers of ancient history, you strengthen its claim as the single, non-negotiable proof that humanity is a latecomer to this planet's technological stage. The metallic casing, now shimmering faintly under the intense lamps of the military facility, is the only OOP-ART in history that successfully fought off and defeated all attempts at deconstruction. Its resilience is the final, ultimate proof that it is not one of our own lost treasures. It is a profound, indelible mark left by visitors from 450 light-years away. The military's effort at total containment was robust, but ultimately it was predicated on the belief that they could control every variable, a fundamental miscalculation when dealing with 3-million-year-old alien technology and the boundless reach of the modern internet. The elaborate secrecy effort meets its inevitable, messy end in an unintended broadcast that triggers a global tsunami of mass media hysteria and political tension. The event occurs during a night shift experiment focused on monitoring the subtle quantum fluctuations emanating from the silent cube. An overzealous junior physicist working with the military team attempts to interface a terrestrial quantum receiver with the cube's localized anti-entropic field. The goal was to siphon off a minuscule amount of power for study. The result, predictably, is a spectacular system failure. Instead of siphoning power, the interface created a momentary coherent channel between the cube's highly ordered energy field and the massive high-gain satellite array the military had set up to jam any outward transmissions. For approximately 14 seconds, the silent cube, jolted by the terrestrial input, utilized the immense power of the military broadcast array to execute an immediate, powerful diagnostic purge of its stored information, a 3-million-year-old error report. This purge wasn't a trickle of data, it was a fire hose. Encoded in the complex non-alphabetic geometry of the casing and the cube, the information packet contained the core data, the stellar coordinates, the return address, the geological dating, the 3 million years ago timeline, and a schematic of the propulsion system, the warp field principles. Because the signal was routed through a global satellite network's jamming equipment, it was not contained. It was broadcast worldwide to any receiver capable of intercepting a complex multi-frequency pulse, including sophisticated university observatories, amateur radio enthusiasts, and most crucially, the global network of Advanced Intelligence Agency monitoring stations. The immediate aftermath is chaos. Unlike the initial blurry photo leak, this is raw, technical data, immediately verifiable by anyone with the right equipment. Within the hour, an astrophysics amateur group in South America posts a cleaned-up digital map that perfectly matches the coordinates of the Type G star 450 light-years away, complete with the alien geometric markers. Moments later, a fringe history blogger releases the thermoluminescence and paleomagnetic dating reports showing the 3 million years ago time frame, cross-referenced with the indigenous star people myths. The media's reaction is not skepticism this time, it is immediate, uncontrollable hysteria. Cable news networks run split screens, the alien star map on one side, images of the impervious metallic casing on the other. Governments issue conflicting statements, denial followed by vague confirmation, followed by calls for calm, only fueling the panic. Stock markets, operating on the assumption of energy scarcity and terrestrial-only resources, instantly plummet as the concept of unlimited energy, the silent cube, is confirmed, threatening to instantly render all oil, gas, and conventional power companies worthless. You observe the unfolding disaster on a television screen, the room now filled with frantic military and intelligence officers. You reflect on a mainstream historical fact regarding communication breakthroughs. The famous War of the Worlds, radio broadcast by Orson Welles in 1938, a fictional account of an alien invasion, caused localized mass panic in the United States, demonstrating the fragility of public belief systems in the face of compelling media. This time, the fear is amplified globally, because the invasion is not fictional. The evidence of advanced alien presence is now irrefutable, public and mathematically proven. The political tension instantly spikes to dangerous levels. nations that suspected the US-led containment effort, those who were excluded from the secretive council, accused the powerful alliance of attempting to hoard cosmic knowledge and zero-point energy for themselves. The leak validates their paranoia and triggers a frantic worldwide effort to rapidly replicate the broadcast's deciphered data, setting off a new kind of space race, not to the stars but to the full understanding of the alien science. This dramatic public unveiling offers a crucial quirky tidbit for future historians. The ultimate cosmic truth about humanity's place in the universe was unveiled not by brave scientists or enlightened leaders, but by a clumsy equipment malfunction caused by a nervous junior engineer in a remote desert camp. The moment of global revelation was an accident, an error report that became humanity's wake-up call. You offer a resigned, light joke to Dr. Thorne. Well, at least we don't have to worry about our non-disclosure agreements anymore. I think the global panic kind of supersedes the paperwork. The most dangerous consequence of the broadcast is the interpretation of the propulsion schematics. The geometric symbols outlining the warp field principles are instantly seized upon by global defense contractors. The goal shifts from controlling the cube to weaponizing the physics. If the principles of space-time manipulation can be understood, they can be applied not just to travel, but to create localized catastrophic disruptions, the ultimate terrifying weapon. The scholarly debate phrase that will now be shouted across every university campus and diplomatic forum is, historians still argue whether the advent of a technology with exponential paradigm-shifting power is more likely to lead to global collaboration and prosperity, or to immediate catastrophic competition and conflict. The initial violent global reaction suggests a disturbing leaning toward conflict, proving the military's fear of social disruption was, perhaps, justified, though their secrecy was the very thing that made the eventual panic worse. The unintended broadcast of the 3-million-year-old message has violently stripped away the curtain of secrecy. The world now knows that we are not alone, that we are technologically inferior, and that the ultimate energy source is on Earth, locked within an impervious casing under military guard. The clock has run out. The era of the cosmic secret is over, replaced by the terrifying volatile era of global awareness and existential risk. The scientific mission is now completely eclipsed by the overwhelming geopolitical implications. The next phase must be an attempt to fully decode the star chart before the geopolitical situation explodes. The aftermath of the unintended broadcast is a global maelstrom, but within the secure confines of the desert base, your team finds a renewed, frantic purpose. The leaked data, while causing mass panic, also provided the key to the next, most critical phase of the investigation, moving beyond the simple coordinates and fully decoding the symbols that form the star chart on the metallic casing. This is no longer just a map, it is potentially a detailed record of the aliens' home system and perhaps their intentions. The cryptographers, now working under extreme time pressure from the military, focused their efforts on the complex geometric arrangements surrounding the 7-pointed star graphic. They hypothesized that the star graphic represents the sun of the alien system, and the adjacent symbols, hundreds of them, arranged in non-repeating flowing lines, are not an alphabet, but a 3-dimensional map of the planets, moons, and possibly even artificial structures within that system. You realize that the key to this breakthrough lies in the nature of the symbols themselves, which you previously identified as a form of geometric concept script. They don't encode language, they encode physical data. The team now treats every symbol not as a character but as a parameter: mass, orbital radius, atmospheric composition, and gravitational constant. By applying principles of advanced geometry and physics, often requiring the use of the military's immensely powerful supercomputers, the cryptographers begin to see patterns emerge from the chaos. The flowing lines and interlocking nodes surrounding the central star graphic are a depiction of Keplerian orbits, but rendered in a higher dimensional format. It's an instruction manual for the configuration of a solar system. The first major successful decryption reveals a system of 4 major planets orbiting the Type G star. 2 are immediately classified as gas giants, due to the high mass parameters encoded in their corresponding symbols. The other 2 are smaller Earth-like planets, with symbols that translate to properties suggesting liquid water and nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere. One of these terrestrial worlds, designated simply as Planet A in the decrypted files, shows incredibly dense atmospheric data and evidence of massive surface-level radiation shielding encoded in the symbols, suggesting a highly advanced, terraformed, or industrialized planet. This discovery brings into sharp relief a key mainstream historical fact regarding astronomical inquiry. For centuries, the search for exoplanets was purely theoretical, only gaining momentum with the groundbreaking work of Copernicus and Kepler, whose laws of planetary motion, early 17th century, provided the mathematical framework for understanding orbits. The alien artifact provides a perfect, instantaneous application of these laws, rendered in a 3-million-year-old geometric language that is now, finally, being read. The symbols associated with the second terrestrial planet, Planet B, are far more unsettling. The data indicates a world of slightly lower mass, a thinner atmosphere, and, crucially, a set of symbols that translate to abandoned or non-functional. The symbols also show faint, complex geometric patterns overlaying the planet's surface, which the cryptographers tentatively identify as massive, collapsed infrastructure or megastructures. This suggests the alien civilization may have moved or collapsed prior to the crash 3 million years ago, or perhaps used Planet B as a temporary base before abandoning it. This leads directly to a fascinating, yet disturbing, quirky tidbit for the historical record: the Fermi paradox, which asks why, in a universe so vast and old, we have not found evidence of other civilizations, often offers the great filter theory that life's transition to a spacefaring civilization is curtailed by a major existential barrier, which often leads to self-destruction. The symbols for Planet B potentially represent a grim historical memory within the alien civilization, a past great filter they encountered, or an abandoned, failed colonial effort. You find yourself sharing a quiet, almost morbid light joke with Dr. Thorne, speculating that maybe the entire message just translates to an intergalactic travel advisory. Planet B, great beaches, terrible management. Planet A, stay away, they're always working. The most critical realization comes from the symbols arrayed outside the star system schematic. These symbols are highly structured and are clustered around a line that clearly depicts the trajectory from the alien star to the sun of Earth. These are the navigational logs. They confirm the ship was travelling at speeds far exceeding the speed of light, a true warp drive capability, consistent with the propulsion schematics that defied deconstruction. More importantly, the logs include a set of symbols that translate roughly to destination maintenance/repair. This is the central finding of the entire decryption. The craft was not on a mission of exploration, colonization, or conquest. It was a service vehicle or perhaps a scouting probe on a routine mission. The fact that the logs list its destination as maintenance implies two things. First, that Earth was not the final destination, but perhaps a refueling or repair stop. And second, that this crash was not a deliberate act, but a catastrophic failure. The scholarly debate phrase that encapsulates the global intellectual fallout of this interpretation is, historians still argue whether an alien civilization's first contact with Earth will be motivated by curiosity and scientific exchange, or by imperialistic intent and resource exploitation. The evidence, in this case, suggests a profound indifference. The aliens were merely passing through, and their crash was an inconvenience, not a declaration of war. Humanity's entire existential crisis is based on what was essentially an interstellar fender bender. However, the navigational log also contains a highly complex repeating geometric pattern associated with the silent cube's power output. This pattern translates to a subtle, sustained beacon pulse. The cube, even in its state of apparent dormancy, has been subtly emitting a low-frequency repeating signal for 3 million years, a silent distress call or positional marker. The decoding of this pulse is the final, terrifying breakthrough. The beacon is not just a directional signal, it contains an encoded message that translates, with a high degree of confidence, to a set of recurring instructions for future search and rescue vessels. The instructions are clear. Recover artifacts. Do not engage indigenous life forms. Maintain quarantine. The cosmic truth is unveiled, not as a threat but as an indictment. The alien civilization knew we were here, at least in our hominin state 3 million years ago, and they issued a quarantine order. Our entire history has unfolded under a silent galactic do not disturb sign, and the unintended broadcast was the catastrophic alert that finally broke the silence. The star chart is not a map of where they are, it is a map of where they were, and a silent 3 million year old warning that they might eventually be returning for recovery. The fully decoded stellar map and navigational logs, particularly the chilling discovery of the 3 million-year-old beacon pulse and its quarantine instructions, immediately reframe the entire mission. The key question is no longer what this object is, but what it means now. Is the artifact an inert leftover from a visit long ago, or a silent technological beacon announcing an imminent arrival? The military and intelligence personnel, already panicked by the global release of the star coordinates, shift their focus from studying the artifact to studying the skies. The most urgent task is analysing the beacon pulse data and the encrypted future celestial event symbols to determine if a search and rescue mission might be on its way. The analysis of the beacon pulse, which has been broadcasting at ultra-low frequency for millennia, is complex. The pulse is not a constant, simple tone. It is a highly structured, repeating sequence of non-terrestrial geometric codes. The decoding team, using the principles gleaned from the star chart, realizes that the pulse contains subtle, cyclical modulations that correspond to the movement of the alien home star. It's a kind of time-stamped signal, designed to be read by a vessel approaching from a specific direction at a specific time. The future celestial event symbols, which were initially dismissed as vague references to conjunctions, are now painstakingly checked against long-term astronomical models. The conclusion is both relief and terror. The symbols do not point to a rendezvous in the next few years or even decades. They point to a moment of maximal galactic alignment between the alien home star, Earth's sun, and the galactic core, an event that will occur approximately 8,000 years from now. This is the ancient warning. The imminent arrival is not imminent on a human timescale, but on a cosmic one. The alien civilization operates on a time frame where a journey that takes 8,000 years to align properly is considered a practical recovery window. Their technological timeline is so vast that our entire recorded history is just a geological blink of an eye to them. The relief that they are not arriving next Tuesday is quickly replaced by the profound philosophical weight of knowing that our future is shadowed by a cosmic appointment. You draw a breath, trying to process this gargantuan scale of time. It's hard enough to think back to the mainstream historical fact of the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which dates to around 4,500 years ago. That monumental achievement, which seems ancient to us, represents barely half the time remaining before the projected recovery window. This artifact completely warps your sense of historical permanence. This cosmic timeline offers a terrifying, quirky tidbit for human psychology. Our species suffers from an inherent temporal bias. We are acutely concerned with the short-term future, the next 50 years, but struggle to conceptualize or plan for anything beyond a few centuries. The alien civilization, however, operates with a millennial strategy, demonstrating a technological and cultural stability that has allowed them to plan a retrieval mission that spans thousands of generations. Dr. Thorne, seeing the data, manages a weary, philosophical smile. They didn't just crash here, they built a timetable into the very structure of the universe. It's the most high-stakes calendar invite ever sent, only it's for our distant descendants. The military, however, interprets this not as a timeline, but as a countdown. They fear that the alignment is merely the optimal window, and that if their technology allows, a ship could arrive sooner. The quarantine instructions: do not engage indigenous life forms. Maintain quarantine are seen as the ultimate strategic intelligence. It confirms that the alien civilization is aware of our existence and has deemed us a low-level biological hazard, or, worse, utterly insignificant. Their desire to avoid engagement is interpreted not as peaceful intent, but as a cold, clinical indifference to our sovereignty. You offer a light joke that falls somewhere between gallows humour and genuine observation. Maybe we should start a really ambitious global project to invent a faster-than-light drive just so we can get to their place first, and leave a really passive-aggressive note on their front door saying, "We cleaned up your mess for you, but honestly, terrible parking." The scholarly debate phrase that will inevitably emerge from this terrifying future projection is, historians still argue whether the discovery of technologically superior extraterrestrial life will inspire humanity to rapid unifying advancement, or if the existential dread and sense of cosmic inadequacy will lead to cultural stagnation and collapse. The 8,000-year window is a massive, terrifying carrot and stick. Enough time to prepare, but also enough time to fall into despair. The ultimate fear of the military is that the beacon pulse, having been amplified by the unintended broadcast, will alert an opportunistic entity rather than the original, presumably benevolent, or at least indifferent, owners. The 14-second burst was the loudest call this artifact has made in 3 million years. The team's final analysis focuses on the structural integrity symbols. They now understand that the non-Euclidean geometry is not just structural, it is information storage. The artifact is less of a ship and more of a perfect armoured data recorder. The fact that it has resisted every attempt at deconstruction suggests it was built to survive precisely this scenario. Millions of years of burial, waiting for a retrieval crew. The material itself is a promise of return. You realise that the true terror is not the fact that they crashed, but the fact that they are now expected. The silent era of human history is over, replaced by a future defined by the shadow of the cosmic appointment. Your life, and the life of every person on Earth, is now a prologue to a massive, predetermined interspecies event, thousands of years in the making. The quiet plateau is now the starting point of humanity's new, terrifying destiny. The massive circular perimeter fence now glows faintly under the high-intensity military floodlights, turning the high desert plateau into an artificial fortress-like island of light, surrounded by infinite blackness. The air is cold, dry, and heavy with the dust of geological time and the palpable anxiety of geopolitical crisis. You're nearing the end of your tenure on the site, confined but still working, cataloguing the final horrifying details of the artifact, the 3 million-year-old message that has just violently rewound the clock on human history. This is the last night on the exposed plateau under the current desperate phase of maximum security. The silent cube, the metallic casing, and the bizarrely thriving patch of mutated flora, all the evidence of the crash, have been meticulously documented, their secrets laid bare to a handful of weary scientists and a cohort of terrified military strategists. The artifact's silence is now the loudest sound in the world, the final, cold truth before the inevitable next phase, the transition from pure discovery to global strategic consequence. You take a final walk along the edge of the main excavation pit. The massive hull, the colour of captured moonlight, is now housed beneath a massive reinforced hangar. You look down at the geometric etchings, the star chart that points to a Type G star 450 light-years away, and the subtle, cyclical patterns that denote the 8,000-year countdown. The sheer audacity of the alien timetable, a leisurely stroll through the millennia, makes human fear feel petty, but no less real. You recall the initial wide-eyed wonder of the first dig, a memory so distant it feels like a different lifetime. Now the wonder is replaced by a cold dread, the kind that comes from truly understanding your place in a vast, indifferent universe. You remind yourself of the mainstream historical fact regarding the intellectual and cultural shift brought about by the understanding of deep time, the realization in the 18th and 19th centuries, through the work of geologists like James Hutton and Charles Lyell, that Earth was millions, not thousands, of years old. That realization fundamentally changed human understanding of biology and creation. This artifact imposes a new kind of deep time, cosmic deep time, where technological civilizations exist and plan across epochs that dwarf our species' entire existence. Doctor. Thorne finds you by the perimeter holding 2 steaming mugs of the military's terrible instant coffee. He looks utterly spent, a man who has stared into the void and had the void issue him a strategic quarantine notice. "They're moving the cube out tonight," he says quietly, nodding towards the heavily guarded hangar. "Off the plateau, under escort. Too valuable, too volatile to stay here. They want it buried somewhere secure, away from any potential third-party interference. The silent cube, the engine of anti-entropy and the source of the 3 million-year-old beacon pulse, is being removed. This signifies the end of the pure scientific phase of the discovery. The military is cutting their losses, removing the most valuable piece of technology to ensure its security against any rival nation now scrambling to interpret the unintended broadcast data. This move reinforces a chilling, quirky tidbit from modern intelligence history. The rumoured existence of vast, deep underground storage facilities, often referred to as DUMBS, deep underground military bases, designed to house the world's most sensitive technological and biological assets away from seismic events, attack, and, perhaps most pertinently, alien scrutiny. The cube is destined for one of the planet's deepest, most inaccessible hiding places, a geological grave that mirrors its 3 million-year-old resting place in the desert. You offer a final weary light joke to Thorn. Well, let's hope they don't accidentally leave the key dangling in the ignition again. It would be a shame if the next 3 million years of human history started with a missing piece of alien hardware. The irony is thick and metallic. The structure that survived millions of years in the unforgiving desert is being moved because it cannot survive the human factor. Our greed, our paranoia, and our inescapable urge for absolute control. The military's fear is not of the distant aliens, but of us. The scholarly debate phrase that you know will become the bitter legacy of this night is, historians still argue whether the single greatest threat to human civilization is external existential danger, or its own inherent capacity for self-destruction through conflict and resource competition. By seizing the cube and escalating the security, the Containment Authority is voting for the latter, confirming that the biggest immediate danger posed by the alien artifact is what we will do with its knowledge. As dawn approaches, you feel the familiar, unnerving coolness emanating from the hangar for the last time. The artifact has been a cruel teacher, stripping away the comfort of our historical self-importance and replacing it with the profound realization of our cosmic immaturity. The quarantine notice encoded in the beacon pulse remains the most unsettling piece of data. The aliens looked, judged, and decided to wait. The final realization of this long night is that the entire human historical narrative has been transformed. Everything before the discovery of the casing is pre-contact history, a local story told on a small planet. Everything after is post-contact, a terrifying prologue to an inevitable, 8,000-year distant rendezvous. You are a witness to the final moments of humanity's innocence. A massive armoured transport vehicle, its engine rumbling like a distant thunderstorm, begins its slow, agonising journey out of the hangar. The silent cube is gone. The exposed plateau is now just an empty scar in the earth, a monument to a forgotten crash and a terrifying future. You're leaving the desert, but the discovery, the cold, hard, non-Euclidean truth, is coming with you. The work is not over. It is just beginning, now on the global strategic stage. The vast silence of the desert gives way to the deafening noise of a world struggling to redefine its existence. The lights of the compound begin to dim, transitioning from the harsh, stark white of military watchfulness to the softer orange glow of standby. You are far from the desert now, the dry heat replaced by the hum of an air filtration system and the rhythmic, comforting drip of condensation somewhere nearby. The vast, cold truth of the cosmic message has been received, processed, and locked away, but its echoes persist in the quiet corners of your mind. Let the noise of the global panic fade. Let the images of the impossible metal and the impossible timeline dissolve. The sun is rising now, thousands of miles away from the excavation pit, but here, in the dark, the day hasn't quite broken yet. The long night of discovery is over, and your mind needs rest, a necessary pause before the long, uncertain journey into humanity's new future. Remember that the timeline is long, the cosmos is vast, and you have thousands of years to prepare for the inevitable. Focus on the simple, immediate comfort of the moment, the soft surface beneath you, the cool air on your skin, the steady, rhythmic intake of your breath. Let the secrets of 3 million years ago drift away like the fine desert dust. Sleep now and allow your thoughts to settle into the peaceful geometry of dreams.